This is slide 8 of our Imperialism unit here. And the last one sort of tied to the Spanish-American War. We've talked about problems in the Caribbean, with Cuba specifically, Puerto Rico and all of that. Let's talk about Filipino unrest. Now, first thing you'll probably notice here is the spelling. Philippines, when you're talking about the place, is spelled with a PH. Philippines. When you're talking about the people that live there, the Filipinos, it's spelled with an F. So, no, that's not a typo. It's just two different spellings for different things here. We discover very quickly that having an empire kind of around the world, but specifically in the Far East, has its advantages and disadvantages. So let's talk about some of the good and the bad here. First of all, the good. This war, Spanish-American War, does serve to kind of unite the North and the South. This is the first time, that we've been at war as a country since the Civil War was over. So this kind of helps unite the North and the South, gives them a common enemy, the Spanish. Okay? Our new empire here provides a source of natural resources that American industrialists need. It also provides us with military bases around the world. But the bad of an Eastern empire is tied directly to those military bases, because we discover very quickly, and you see the globe up here in the corner, the picture there, these are all little now military bases we have that we didn't before. We discover very quickly that it's very expensive to maintain those bases around the world. You have to pay soldiers to staff those bases. You have to supply those bases. So we have to send ships constantly resupplying all these military bases. So it's very expensive to maintain an empire, something that Europe had discovered a long time ago. We're just now coming to that realization because we're a little late getting to the imperialism party. But let's talk about some of the problems with this Far Eastern empire here. In the Philippines, we see a revolt, an uprising. The Filipinos had assumed that they would be given their freedom just like the Cubans were. Oops, bad assumption. They thought the Teller Amendment would apply to them as well. Think back, the Teller Amendment says that once Cuba was given their freedom, Spain would be driven out. No, sorry, I got that backwards. Once Spain was driven out, Cuba would be given its freedom. Well, the Filipinos thought the same thing. Once Spain was driven out, they would be given their freedom. And they weren't. So they had assumed they would follow the same path as Cuba. Turns out they don't. So, under the leadership, once again, of Emilio Aguinaldo, he's the one who helped us fight against Spain. Now, Emilio Aguinaldo will lead the Filipino people again in uprising against the Americans. The Filipinos are poorly equipped. They don't have an army like we do. So they take to the jungle and fight a guerrilla warfare type of war. Okay? Guerrilla warfare means they're going to fight in small groups of soldiers, hit-and-run tactics, moving very quickly through the jungle. They know this terrain. We don't. They are fighting to defend their homeland. We're not. And we will discover very quickly that this is not going to be an easy fight. Okay? The fighting would go on for a little over 2 years. And during that 2 years, just over 4,200, just over 4,200 Americans were killed in the Philippines, fighting to put down this revolution. Now, that may sound like a lot, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the Filipinos. Over 600,000 Filipinos died in the fighting. So 4,200 compared to 600,000. And when not all of those were killed in fighting, many of them, hundreds of thousands, were taken prisoner, were tortured by the Americans, and died in captivity. It was very common for American soldiers to torture the Filipinos during this fighting. That begins in February 1899, and the fighting would go on into 1901 when Aguinaldo is finally captured. There you see the picture, Aguinaldo being brought on board a ship, the USS Vicksburg, getting ready to salute there. When Aguinaldo is captured, the fighting will die out, but not before the U.S. is given a very black eye here in terms of the world opinion on us. Okay? Now we have to rebuild relations with the Philippines. So a civil government is set up by the United States to help rebuild the Philippines, the cities, the small towns, and the man put in charge of that will be the civil governor, William Howard Taft. Yes, at this time, he's future President Taft, as Roosevelt hasn't even taken over yet. He will here real shortly. But Taft is sent to the Philippines to rebuild the Philippines and rebuild the American relationship with the Philippines. And he's very, very good at that. Here you see one of my favorite pictures in history. This is President Taft in the Philippines riding a water buffalo. And if you'll recall, President Taft, our largest president ever, is quite the burden, I would guess, to this water buffalo, who looks to not be enjoying the ride he's giving to Governor Taft. Love that picture. It's a great picture. But it'll be up to Taft to rebuild the American relationship with the Filipino people, and he does. We pump a lot of money into rebuilding the Philippines. Right? We rebuild the cities. We build hospitals, we build schools, we build libraries, and it is all built on an American model, so assimilation. If you'll think back to the Native Americans, when we talked about assimilating the Native Americans, making them more white, we're going to do the same thing in the Philippines. The government that is put in will look exactly like the American government. 2 houses of Congress, a president as leader, a system of courts, and so forth. We will rebuild the Philippines to look just like the United States. And Taft is the one in charge of seeing that happens. And he does a very good job. By the time he's finished, we have a good relationship with the Filipinos. They appreciate the money we've pumped into rebuilding their country. And we continue a really good relationship with them for the most part, off and on, to today. Eventually, the Philippines will be given their independence. On July 4th, yes, it's their Independence Day too, symbolic choice there for us, July 4, 1946. So after World War II ends in 45, we figure, it's a little hypocritical to give people that want their freedom to not give them their freedom after we just fought a war for this. So on July 4, 1946, the Philippines will officially become its own independent little country, and you see the celebration with the Filipino flags flying down there. Okay. All right, that sort of ends our discussion of events surrounding the Spanish-American War and the fallout from the Spanish-American War in the Caribbean and in the Philippines. We've got a couple other places or topics here to look at in our last few slides. But moving on from the Spanish-American War into some issues in China.